to the Old Testament book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 42. And I'm going to read for your hearing 4 verses of scripture. We are in a series where we're talking about the foretelling of the birth of Jesus. We're talking about hopeful thinking, and we're talking about how Isaiah mentioned the birth of Jesus. He talked about the life of Jesus and the death of Jesus 700 years before he was even born. We're in the middle of that installment here in chapter 42. From the New International Version of the Bible, it reads like this: "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his teaching the highlands will put their hope." Amen. I want to talk on this anniversary celebration with this theme in mind: the servant's life. The servant's life. It has been said, my brothers and sisters, that the measure of a person's greatness is not the number of servants a person has, but the number of people a person serves. That phrase has been spoken into existence because people need to know that servanthood isn't about what servants receive. Servanthood is about what a servant is willing to give. Am I right about it? Speaking of giving, it has also been said that an easy way to tell if you have a servant's heart is how you act when you are treated like a servant. If you truly want to get an honest assessment of who you are as a servant, all you have to do is assess how you act when you're asked to do things that you don't want to do, when you're asked to give which you don't want to give, when you're asked to go above and beyond the call of duty when you really don't want to go above or beyond anything. Well, speaking of above and beyond, listen to this one. If serving is below you, then leadership is beyond you. That has been said by many, because many have come to realize that leadership is an ability that is acquired and a quality that is developed through servanthood. It's just that simple, church. If you don't serve right, you won't lead right. That's what God sought to tell his chosen people. God was trying to tell Judah that leading people into the future is about the best servant, is about being the best servant nation that they could be. That is, regardless of the circumstances that they were in, regardless of the conditions of their climate, regardless of the problems that they experienced in their lives. At the time of this text, God's chosen people were on their way into captivity in Babylon. They didn't know it quite yet, but like Israel was carted off into captivity by the Assyrians, Judah would be stripped away from their way of life and taken some 900 miles east and forcefully thrown into a way of living and operating that was foreign to them at the least. They would be ushered into a culture that didn't know nor respect the God of our salvation. Now notice what I just said. God's people would be thrust into an environment that didn't know nor respect the one who could turn their weaknesses into their strengths, who could turn their losses into their gains, and who could turn their troubles into their triumph. In fact, this God has the power to turn death into life. After being in such an anti-trusting kind of culture, they would slowly drift away from trusting God themselves. They would slowly drift away from believing that he could work things out and that he could they could have a healthy and hopeful outlook on the future. At best, all they would have left were memories of a period of time and a season in the past that was more enjoyable than the present was. Since their previous period of bondage in Egypt was so brutal, and because the struggle towards freedom was so slow for them at that time and so painful for them at that time, God's people wouldn't exactly be optimistic about the promise of deliverance, much like their foreparents were when they were in bondage. So they were exactly the same way that their forefathers were. They weren't trusting God because of the pain that they were going through. So they weren't exactly looking forward, looking towards the future with gladness. And that's a problem. So Isaiah was God's mouthpiece to go down and to add hope to their thinking for the future. I said Isaiah, y'all. Isaiah, the one who is known as the Apostle Paul of the Old Testament. Isaiah, the one who is also called the Shakespeare of the prophets. Better yet, Isaiah, the one who is the Prince of prophets, was given the dual task of delivering bad news and good news to the same group of people. Now that's interesting. He was one person who was chosen by God to deliver bad news and good. Look, most prophets either have the gift to preach one or the other. Isaiah was a very unique prophet who didn't just talk about judgment that was on the way from the Lord. He also was talking about the joy that was on the way from the Lord. He wasn't just talking about the pain of the past. He was called to talk about the purpose for the future. In fact, listen to this. It has been said that the one prophet out of all of the prophets who was able to communicate the full counsel of the Christ was Isaiah, whose name in itself means salvation. And he did it some 700 years before the Christ was born. It's interesting that there are 66 books. There are 66 chapters in the book of Isaiah. The first 39 chapters are more geared to the pronouncement of God's judgment that was underway. And the last 27 chapters, deacons, were more geared to the pronouncement of joy that was on the way. Now that sounds real familiar, doesn't it? There are 66 books in the Bible, 39 Old Testament books that deal with the judgment of God's law, 27 books in the New Testament that deal with the joy of God's love. So here in chapter 42, Isaiah is speaking specifically about what it would take for Judah to stop focusing on their problems and start focusing on their purpose. He wanted to get them to stop thinking about the pain of the past and start thinking about the joy of a promised future. Because the prophet reminded Judah in the last chapter, chapter 41, that they were set apart from other nations to be God's servant nation. God used the prophet in chapter 42 to give Judah the model or the example of what it means to be a servant. Let the church say, a servant. Although the life of the one that they were called to emulate wasn't even born yet, God so loved his people that God gives them a template of how servants are to live. And he gives us a picture of what real Christ-centered servants are made of. Verse 1 says it real clear. It says, here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit in him, and he will bring justice to the nations. The first verse is all we need to lift up. Why? Because it says everything that needs to be heard about the servant. What needs to be heard is that servant is that the Lord, that God delights in that kind of servant. Out of all of the names or titles that Jesus has been given down and through the years, the favorite name of Isaiah that there has been over 150 names that have been given to Jesus through the years. Paul calls him the chief cornerstone. Peter called him the shepherd and bishop of souls. John called him the lion of the tribe of Judah. Jeremiah called him living water. Ezekiel called him king of kings. Isaiah called him wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. But the most to the point that Isaiah gives to Jesus is servant. Wow, because that's who Jesus is at the core. After all, he's the one who in Matthew 20:28 and Mark 10:45 that said the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give himself as a ransom for many. He's the one who came in John 4:34 saying, my food is to do the will of the one who sent me and to finish his work. He's the one who in Luke 22:27 says, but I am among you as one who is a servant. Since this is what Jesus said he was sent to do, and since this is what the prophets prophesied, specifically Isaiah prophesied that he would do, it should be noted, church, that liberation came into the world through a servant's way of living. Being delivered from the hand of the enemy ultimately comes as a result of seeing and experiencing the way a servant of God actually lives. Oh, my. I'm not talking about seeing how a servant worships in church, or seeing how a servant has a bumper sticker on their car, or seeing how a servant has a cross around their neck, or seeing how a servant listens to gospel music all the time, or seeing how a servant posts things on social media, but seeing how a servant lives every day. In other words, none of us would be saved if it weren't for the fact that somebody was willing to live like a servant. More importantly, none of us would be here unless somebody took the initiative to go down for people. Can I ask you a question? Are you willing to go down for people? I mean, it's an oxymoron with what the world tries to teach us. The world tries to teach us that everybody has to come up to where we are. But the Bible teaches us that we ought to go down where other people are. Deliverance has been granted to the world because of a servant's willingness to become less for others so that they can become more. That's what the prophet tells the people of Judah. He says, yes, things have changed, and yes, things will continue to change, but you can't let the changes that are happening around you to keep you from trusting God. In fact, the reason why the things that are happening around you are happening is because you need to show other people that no matter what happens or how long it takes, that you will continue to trust God and to serve him wholeheartedly. Do I have a witness in here? Is there anybody in the building who is willing to trust God through it all? The servant's life is a life that is lived by people so that others can be set free as a result of seeing how God works in and through other people. And that's the reason why I chose to preach this sermon today, or the Lord ordered it up, because on the 8th anniversary of a pastor, the one thing that you ought to praise God for is that your pastor is a servant of the Lord who is willing to go down for people so that people can be here. Oh, you don't believe what I'm trying to say? I mean, he's willing to go down, and what I mean by that is he's willing to take the time to teach, he's willing to take the time to preach, he's willing to take the time to the servanthood of Jesus. And what is it that is a template for us as we serve that God wants to delight in? Are you ready for that? Ready for this? God delights in his servant Jesus because his actions spoke louder than his words. Yeah, I know that you want me to say something with some crazy adjectives, and you want me to say something that you never heard before, that's so profound that it makes you hold your head and wave your hand at me and shout like you never heard it before. But listen, the profound things are often in the center. God delights in his servant Jesus because his actions spoke louder than his words. Look at verse 2. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. This speaks of calm nature of Jesus. It speaks of the patient person in the Word made flesh. It speaks of how he would be soft-spoken and encouraging, rather than hardcore and overbearing with words. In fact, the latter is what his opponents would do. They would force themselves on people, argue with people, and berate people, but no, not Jesus. He was not one who would quarrel or rabble-rouse. Why? Because he would be connected to a source of power that his opponents didn't know anything about. He was a part of something that didn't need to be questioned or debated. That's why he told his disciples, when people don't agree with you, don't waste your time dealing with foolish arguments. You just kick the dust off the ground and just keep it moving. Because listen, God will handle them while you do what you're called to do with somebody else who is willing to respond. And you don't have to get out of sorts when people don't put their trust in God. You just keep pushing, put your trust in God, and know that God will work everything else out. Yes, he will. So he carries himself in a manner that matches the certainty of his conviction. That's what Jesus does. Here it is. Servants do what servants do because of their convictions, because of the convictions that they have, not because of the attention that they get. Jesus got attention because of his conviction. He didn't go after people's attention. That wasn't his conviction. His conviction was to do the will of his Father. And because he loved God and knew God and believed God, he didn't have to raise a fuss. He could just let people see who he was more than they heard who he was. Somebody said, I'd rather be a servant than to hear one any day. I'd rather want to walk with me than just to show the way. And eyes are better people and more willing than to hear. Advice may be misleading, but examples are always clear. And the very best of teachers are the ones who live their creed. For to see good put to action is what everybody needs. I can soon learn to do it if you let me see it done. I can watch your hand in motion, but your tongue too fast they run. And the message you deliver may be very fine and true, but I'd rather get my lesson by observing what you do. For I may misunderstand you and the fine advice you give, but there's no misunderstanding how you act and how you live. Let the church say amen. That's how Jesus lived. That's the first thing that he delights in. Here's second. God also delights in his servant because he was about construction rather than destruction. Construction, not destruction. It's about building up, not tearing down. Look at verse 3. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. That speaks of the nurturing nature of Jesus, who would come into this world to give hope to the hopeless, help to the helpless, to be bread for the hungry, water for the thirsty, a brother to the brotherless. He came to do things that would help make people better. This is what Isaiah It's what is used on instruments to play music. It's what's used to make pens to write on parchments. It was used to make mats for people to lie down on. And when reeds get used up, they just get wet, so wet that they don't become useful anymore, or they begin to splinter when they get dry. So what happens when you have a bruised reed is you just take it and you throw it away. Isaiah is likening a reed to people, because a real servant doesn't throw people away. A real servant works hard to help those reeds that are bruised become whole and become the best that God wants them. Maybe that's not good enough for you. Okay, smoldering wick. A wick is, once you have a candle and it's what is put in there, and once a candle starts to melt and the liquid starts to rise, the fire is prone to go out. Back then they didn't have candles like we do, but they had wicks that were put in lamp oil, and once the lamp oil was gone, the wick would go down to a small smolder, and all you had to do was just pick it up and throw it away. But see, what Isaiah is saying is, look, God is the kind of God that wants his servants not to quench people's fires, but he wants servants who will start people's fire. Have you ever been around somebody who tears you down as soon as you get in the conversation? They wear you out because they have nothing positive to say. They have no joy. Everything is negative about what you can do and why you can't do it and why you shouldn't do it. The devil is a liar. Give me a church of 20 people who are people that don't put out fires, and I'll show you a powerful church that can ignite not just a church, but can ignite a community, can ignite a neighborhood, can ignite a section of town, can ignite a city, a state, and even a country. Do I have anybody in here who knows that when you start fires, you become better used to God? Because he's not about destruction. He's about construction. Can I move from that? I really don't feel like moving from that. Because there's some powerful stuff that happens when you become the type of person that helps people more than you hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. But when you know that you have help from God, you can help people who are broken, and you can make them a whole lot better. Do I have a witness in here? God has been known to do some great things with broken people. He was able to win a battle for the people in the book of Judges by broken pots. He was able to feed a multitude with broken bread. He was able to fill a room with fragrance with a broken alabaster box. And Jesus was able to save a world with a broken body. A lot of great things can happen when things are broken. God delights in his servant Jesus because his actions spoke louder than words. He delights in his servant Jesus because he was about construction rather than destruction. And God lastly delights in his servant Jesus because he majors in perseverance and not in giving up. He majored in perseverance and minored in giving up. Jesus was the type of servant who didn't quit. Bishop, we are living, pastoring, and leading in a time where folk give up and quit too often. And listen. We give up too often, and then we get embarrassed because we quit so quickly. So we don't go back where we started. We go somewhere else and try to start over, and then quit, and then go somewhere else and start over, and then quit. And before you know it, when there's a citywide revival with 7 pastors, you done went to every church. And the problem has always been somebody else. When the reality is that life isn't ever going to be easy. Dealing with people is never going to be easy. You're not going to ever be in the perfect situation. Everybody is going to find faults in other people. But when you look for the great things that can happen and choose to be more positive than negative, then you'll be able to persevere your way through some stuff. Am I talking to somebody in there? Verse 4, he will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. And his teaching, the islands will put their hope in him. I thought that was incredible, because the islands will put their hope in him. It suggested that Jesus would become so popular as a servant, and folk would marvel in the fact that out of all the things that he had to endure, he never quit. They couldn't stop him. They tried to stop him, but they couldn't stop him. He was denied, he was betrayed, he was put on a cross, he was ridiculed against, they put him in a kangaroo court, brought him up on some Trump charges, but guess what? He never quit. He had to hang in there when he was by himself, but he hung in there when there was nobody around him. He had friends who fell asleep on him, and it seemed like he had a God who abandoned him. But guess what? He didn't even let that stop him from doing what he knew he was called. I'm trying to get somebody to start thinking hopefully, because we quit too quickly when we are in some situation. The devil is a liar. If we don't want to be the people that God has called us to be, we can't quit at all. We have to keep going and do what God has called us to do. I know that is hard. I know that you need a shoulder to cry on. I know that you might need some counseling, and you might even need a therapist. But guess what? Don't ever discount the counsel of our God and the therapist that comes from the Holy Spirit. He knows all about your concerns, and he will take care of you no matter what. Don't you ever give up. Don't you throw in the towel. You just keep on doing what you're called to do. Why? Because God is faithful. God is faithful, and he is trustworthy. And I've never met anybody who is as trustworthy as my God. Sure, I've had some problems, but I will never know that I have a God who can solve the problems. If I ever had a problem, you ought to stand up and high-five your neighbor and say, neighbor, I'm going to hang in there because it's in my spiritual DNA. I'm going to hang in there because the blood of Jesus is the blood that washed away all of my sins. Thank you, Pastor, for inviting me. I pray the Lord blesses you all real good. But if you really want to be a powerful servant, you will be able to hang in there and persevere and endure hardness as a good soldier. Now find somebody and say, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to trust in the Lord with all of my heart and lean not to my own understanding. I'm going to depend on him because my God is good and his mercies endure forever. Somebody ought to say yeah. Somebody ought to say yeah. If you're happy about it, give God some praise for the great things that he has done. Come on, everybody, please stand on your feet. Church, stand on your feet. Everybody hand. Close your eyes.